What seems more obvious than our homes? Our home is the place we go to be ourselves, by ourselves. And yet, COVID-19 has shown us that the home, like everything else around us, can also be strange, contain otherness, be multifaceted. Springing from our new uncanny habitats, we find potential. How can this current, ongoing, and scarring disruption of the most obvious and intimate of spaces help us disrupt other obvious patterns in our lives and challenge the political status quo? The obvious is always the land of the powerful. To them, to those of us privileged enough to be counted among their number, most of our world is invisible. Whether we're talking about physical limitations like borders or police blockades, or social limitations like money or moral norms, the privileged glide through the world, and that ease of movement is thought of as obvious. Of course I can walk the streets of my city without fear of being harassed by police. Of course I can buy the basic necessities I need to live and more. Of course I can fly to a different country and cross borders. Of course I live in a house. Of course I have a home. What is more obvious, more invisible, more taken for granted to those who have it, than the very existence of a place to call your own? And yet, the COVID-19 and the Right to Housing report submitted to the 75th UN General Assembly identifies 1.8 billion people who didn't have sufficient housing to take shelter in during the pandemic, at least so far. Those are 1.8 billion people who, by force of their very visible, very non-obvious circumstances, could not lock down. They couldn't just stay home. To them, the lack of a proper house is a lot realer than our actually existing homes. Their lack of a home exerts more felt influence on their lives, has more impact on what they can and can't do than our own existing houses. This, as you might already be feeling, is quite weird. We might even say that the fact that our physical existing houses are less real than a non-existent house is uncanny. That uncanny feeling, the unheimlich, arises when the familiar and the unfamiliar mix, when our expectations are upended, when the obvious is suddenly made less obvious. This is clear enough in this case. All of us, whether through fiction or by taking the wrong turn down a street we thought we knew, or seeing the inside of our apartments in the middle of the night, have encountered the uncanny. But what I'd like to propose to you, what might not be so obvious, is that the uncanny is an opportunity. By its very nature, the weird, the unreal, the bizarre, the uncanny all challenge the obvious. And, by extension, they all challenge power. At their core, these genres or themes or sensations ask one question: what if the way things are now were different? What if the things we most take for granted were to suddenly change? What would remain that was important? And what, if anything, would we like to remove or keep? For both the 1.8 billion people without proper housing, and for those of us with proper housing, the pandemic is an opportunity to really see our surroundings for what they are: the sites of privilege, normalcy, and power. Our homes were irrevocably changed by the pandemic, but we shouldn't strive to go back to normal. We should push further, using the uncanny thrust created by the pandemic to cut to the core of what houses are and to ask ourselves the hard questions on what they can and should be.